welcome to our February Safety Action webinar. This morning I'll be handing over to Gary Rowe in a moment. He's already here. Gary's going to talk to you about warning signage and whether it's adequate to use a chain barrier across an unsafe area, and whether that's adequate to keep people safe. And Gary's also going to talk to you about credentials certificates and how to tell whether what you've been provided is a genuine credential and what you should accept and what you should not. Over to you, Gary.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Andrea. Just one second and I'll share my screen again, if I may, and turn it back into broadcast mode. Thanks everyone for tuning in once again. This is our first webinar for 2021. We hope it's a much better year for everyone this year. We're still going to have COVID around, but I think we know it, we understand it better, and I think we've got better controls in place, or at least I hope the government has, and they're continuing to refine it. So we'll continue to run our periodic briefings as online. So we're going to continue to do this each month. We think we'll do this throughout this year. I'll mention training in a moment and what we might have coming up. So what I try to do in these sessions, in this short half hour, maybe over your morning tea, maybe while you have a cup of coffee or tea, explain a bit of the background to some of the questions that are arising in workplace safety, either regularly or that we feature in our safety newsletter. So much of what I'm going to talk about you may or may not have had time to have a look at, or to fully understand the context out of our February newsletter. So let's first look at, in January, we featured our training schedule. Now this year we are planning to run a number of what we call face-to-face training sessions, but of course we're going to go month by month and just see how COVID rules pan out and if it's safe to do so. If we do, we'll be totally COVID safe, all the right social distancing, hand sanitizers, etc. But at the moment, we're looking in March, mid-March, for our traditional two-day safety leadership course. And an interesting one coming up, which I'll feature in a moment, is the error management in April with Dr. Todd Bentley. So we'll come to that. So there's you can find this training program on our website. It's also in our January safety newsletter, or you can call the office if you're interested in any of those. So let's turn to what I would like to cover. Ever since I've been a safety engineer for over 30 years, I have questions about, is a warning sign only to protect your backside, or does it have some real legal purpose and role? And then you look at around the workplace, and particularly if you go back 20 years ago, there were low chain barriers everywhere, and some of them had little sign hanging off it, do not enter, authorised staff only, or whatever. So this intrigues me about chain barriers and warning signage, and there was only late last year a significant legal case around this issue, so I'm going to share that with you in a moment. There's some new silica dust regulations in Victoria and WA. Andrea mentioned somebody presents a training certificate or license at the workplace, and is it valid? And there's they look vastly different. There's lots and lots of them. So let's have a quick look at that. I was also intrigued by a workers' comp case that was reported late last year, where an office worker successfully gained workers' compensation because there was a non-toxic odour in the office. So I want to repeat, this was not toxic. It was not at a harmful level for whatever the items that were measured in the air, but it was the workers could smell it, and one particular lady suffered significant symptoms allegedly from this and succeeded workers' comp. So we'll touch on that. And I've mentioned that understanding human error. So let's have a look at what I'd like to explain today for you. So, as I've mentioned, there's been a lot of questions around, am I able to put a chain barrier across a walkway saying no access, and is that valid, and am I now legally covered for my duty of care in relation to this? So the case in question, which we did feature in our February newsletter, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, an image of a conveyor with some exposed rollers there, and a worker got caught in these rollers and tragically was killed, and this was back in 2012. So the actual incident goes back a long way, but the court case has only just arrived in the Queensland courts. And the question arose as to whether the director and the company were negligent, having a chain and a warning sign, and also saying there was an isolation switch and the person should have pushed the isolation switch before accessing the area, and there was a removable guard, which I don't have a picture of here, but we do in the newsletter. And what was interesting is that the judge made a very clear decision, and so this will become, if you like, a precedent case, and I think this has already been a precedent, but this company ran the case and tried to allege that a removable guard, a sign and a chain and an access to an isolation point, had the person used it, would have prevented this tragic accident. And the judge made two interesting observations. And the first one is a chain or an easily removable guard that you can just lift off is no barrier and insufficient for serious hazards. And the reason I think this comes up in the workplace, often as a question, people out maybe in the garden, they've dug a hole, oh, I'm going to go to lunch. Is it, do I have to fill the hole back in? Do I have to put up a construction safety fence? Or in fact, can I put some tape around it? And what is sufficient? So this question, it keeps coming up over and over around particularly temporary works, short-term works, as well as in fixed workplaces. So let's be clear, if the hazard is serious, a sign, tape, and low chain barrier is not sufficient. This is crystal clear. So what we have to have is zero access guarding, or we have to have a fence that meets the Australian standard, as in temporary construction zone fence, to protect and keep people out of that area. And that leads on to another interesting question. So people say to me, well, if that's true, Gary, do I have to put razor wire or barbed wire at the top of my fence to stop the naughty boys climbing it? And the answer is no. What you have to put in is a safe and compliant fence. You do not have to have it 5 metres high, electrified and with barbed wire on the top to stop people getting in. What you have to have is where you're going to keep normal, rational, sane people out, but in fact burglars and people with ill intent can always get into any facility. So you're not required to go to those lengths. So people can't understand. So you tell me a chain barrier and a sign's not good enough, but you're happy to have a fence, but I can climb the fence. And the answer is yes, as long as that's a compliant, adequate fence, which would keep a normal, rational person out. So if you talk about out of hours, unattended, could the naughty boys climb it and get in? The answer is yes. So we need fixed guards if you've got a machine guarding hazard. What you should have is zero access standard of guarding. And interestingly, we put in featured in our newsletter, I think a couple of years ago, there was a legal case where not only is a low chain barrier inadequate in this case, in this legal case that's recently come out, but we actually showed where a low chain barrier was a trip hazard. The fact that it said no entry was irrelevant to the court. The court said it was clear and obvious that workers will attempt to step over it. So my point to you is, low chain barriers are a trip hazard. Stop doing it. Do not put them in. Don't allow anyone to have them. Get rid of them. I would rather you have a higher sign or chain, and it could be a plastic chain that could be broken, because you're not going to keep, there's no guarantee of keeping people out. It's guidance at that point. If all you want is guidance, then that's okay. But don't create a trip hazard as you do it. So this idea of low chain barriers around the workplace and even public areas, they're a hazard. Stop doing it. So either put in a solid fence and barrier if people are not meant to get in, or just use it as a much higher guidance, as like tape around something, because I'm supervised in the area, but I just want to keep you off my new lawn because I don't want the lawn damaged. So that's the essence of chain barriers and signage. Not everyone here will be involved in processes that involve engineered stone. Engineered stone, by the way, most of these new stone bench tops are either in kitchens, bathrooms, and some workplaces. It's called engineered stone because it looks a lot like granite, but it's been manufactured. And what people haven't realised initially, it has a much higher content, silica content, than natural granite. And therefore, when people cut and grind it, their exposure is like 10 times higher to the hazardous silica dust. And so people have been working with natural stone bench tops for decades and decades, maybe hundreds of years. We've not seen this level of injury and health problems arise. So it's come out of this engineered stone. So Victoria suppliers now have to identify the percentage of silica, and they've got to recommend controls. Employers that have a silica stone license, so this is employers who are manufacturing, processing engineered stone, particularly on a large scale. So anyone who's a benchtop supplier will be procedurally cutting, grinding and shaping these bench tops, for example. Then to do a risk assessment and hold a silica stone license. Power tools that have integrated water or dust extraction. Interestingly, workers that have not just have appropriate respirators, but they have to have been fit tested. And we've covered fit testing in previous webinar and also in our newsletter. We might feature that again this year because not only with COVID, but with this engineered stone, these are probably the two key areas that are bringing fit testing to the fore. And this is forever and ever. People have been saying, yep, I've got dust, I've got fumes, I'll wear a respirator. That's nice. What you don't know is how effective that respirator is on that particular face. So we all have different shaped faces, and sometimes respirators that you put on have leakage around the edges. And you think, oh, it's only a small leakage. Well, that leakage is allowing the toxic dust or fumes to get in, and therefore your respirator is effectively non-existent in terms of its effectiveness for you. So, and the Vic regs also require the workers need to be trained and their health monitored. And on that point, WA is extending their health monitoring for silica workers. They've halved the silica exposure standard and have prescribed a more precise lung testing function that they require. So in our little journey through a number of topics this morning, I'll just move on to, is that a valid certificate, which is one of the subjects in our February newsletter. And as I've mentioned before, there's lots and lots of different types of certificates around. So let's just have a quick look. So number one, prescribed in the construction safety regulations in each state of Australia, there's called a construction induction safety card, which is what workers need to hold to go onto construction sites. So that's fine. I think we understand that. HRW here is high risk work. It's a term prescribed by the safety regulations, but it's not high risk work. It's really high risk equipment. It just happens the government calls it high risk work. So it's a bit confusing, really. It's not the work, it's the equipment. But you need a license to operate prescribed items, and it's only prescribed items that are actually high risk work. So this is dogging and rigging, operating of a boiler and steam engines of certain capacity, crane operation, reach stacker, boom elevator platform above a certain size, hoists, concrete placing booms, forklift trucks, I think we all understand, and order picking forklift trucks. And interesting also, scaffolding is classed as plant. So prescribed plant, you have to have a government controlled license. So that's your high risk work license. In addition, somebody coming on your site might need a trade license. So they might be asbestos removalists, they might be electricians, they might be plumbers. Or they might be handling refrigerants, so it could be an environmental license, around that for the work that they do. So there's your high risk work and your trade licenses. But guess what? There's lots of equipment which is really quite potentially hazardous, for which there is no license category. So for example, bobcats, excavators, front end loaders, road rollers. We've featured a case where there's been fatalities in relation to road rollers, and they don't go very fast, but they're extremely heavy and dangerous if they happen to run over a worker out on the road. So there's, what about all these other items of equipment that I've just told you, other pieces of plant that are known to be hazardous, potentially hazardous? So what we then arrange is what we call a competency certificate. So there's TAFE courses and other courses which people can attend and get a competency certificate for those items of plant. And then what I've not shown here, in addition, as a subset of this competency certificate, there's a number of items of handheld power tools, which are really also quite potentially dangerous, for which there is no license category. For example, a chainsaw. We know that if that is used incorrectly, it could have hazardous results. So what do we do with that? Once again, competency certificate. Often it'll be a TAFE, or rather recognised training organisation, can issue a competency certificate, but it is not a licence, because only the government can issue a licence, and so they're already prescribed in that category above. So when you get into these competency areas, what the government has done in each state around Australia is formed what is called training.gov.au, which is on the screen here, and what they've done is prescribed competent courses and content that different training organisations can then operate to and issue, if you like, common certificates, or at least certificates that you and I can at least understand and accept what the content of the training is and accept that they are competent. So if in doubt for those areas are not covered by a licence, go to training.gov.au. They'll probably give you, you can find a code for a particular certificate. And I think in the recent newsletter, for example, the code for chainsaw, you don't have to write this down, it's in our newsletter, is capital AHCARB 205A. That's a training code at training.gov.au for chainsaws. So that'll now tell you the content, what the training, the length of the training, what that would be, and hopefully what the certificate would look like as well. So shown on screen here, we've got this red image from this fictitious one from a Phil Jarvis in this case. We get presented with these doing pre-qual and induction checks for helping some of our clients. And the question is that a valid certificate? Should I accept it? It's quite old. I don't fully understand who's issued it. Is it valid? So the one below from New South Wales is on there from the New South Wales WorkSafe website, showing the current format of their most recent certificates. But remember, unless they've got an expiry, those certificates will be valid indefinitely as long as they've had continuous work in that period. So we can accept certificates, and we have to, from some of these ones that look very strange to us, but we have to sometimes investigate whether that was a valid organisation and course that the person's undertaken. Office odour causes workers' comp. So bear with me with my smile. I'm not trying to be in any way belittle what the effects that one particular lady suffered. But what you'll see is that the bottom right-hand corner of my slide here is what we call the bell curve. And I thought this might help explain a little bit about this case. And not everyone fully appreciates it. Probably subconsciously they do, but consciously they haven't always connected. Ah, that's stupid. How can someone get workers' comp? It's only a bit of odour. And they determined as a fact that the odours that were there did not exceed any of the recognised exposure standards. So you would have to say the exposure was not harmful. But when we say not harmful, what we mean is not harmful against the recognised standard. What the bell curve shows us, and you need to remember this for every attribute, or not only of humans, but probably natural phenomena. And what the bell curve shows is that the hard left-hand end, you might have the people that have very low resistance to exposure to certain chemicals. And we all know different people suffer allergies much more than other people. So they're at the low end, if you like. Down here, very low exposure is harmful to them. Most of us live in the middle of this bell curve for almost everything. So if you want to go the height of people, only a small number of people are at the extreme right-hand end, very tall people. And only a small number of people, I'll call them dwarfs. It's probably not the right term these days, but you know, people born naturally who are very short. But the bulk of us live in the middle ground. We're not too high, we're not too short. This is where we are. That's where the bulk of the people are. The speed of people, how fast can people run? A small 1% of people can run really fast, 1% can't run at all, and the bulk of us are in the middle and we can run okay, but not too fast. So it doesn't matter whether it's your hearing, your eyesight, how fast you go. This bell curve applies to virtually everything to do with human attributes. And all I want to show you is you can have a safe, what is normally regarded as safe and compliant workplace, but one individual can have a valid claim. They're not necessarily, because I have no idea about this case, so I don't know the merits. I can only assume the effects were real and the effects were caused by the odour in this office. I have no other information, but let's assume that the person is open and honest, and this is, and it is the fumes that have caused this. One, that person could have very low level of tolerance, so they're at the far left-hand end of the spectrum, and there will always be a number of people that will be in these out in the pointy bits of the bell curve for very low percentage of the population. And so this person has suffered more severe effects from these odours. Other people in the office, and including visitors to the Centrelink office down in Devonport, Tasmania, complained of the fumes, but they didn't suffer ill health effects, but this person did. So there's probably two parts. One, the person was probably ultra sensitive, so they're right at the end of the bell curve. But also, if as an employer you ignore stress and worry and fears of people that grow in their mind and grow, and every time I smell that odour, it makes me think I'm dying, I'm being poisoned, it's toxic. So if you ignore, they may be wrong, but their stress is real. And I just think in this case, as you may see if you've read the newsletter, I topped off this article by simply saying, if you would not accept that odour in your house, then it's not acceptable in the office for everyone else. I'm just trying to pick a standard. So if I came to my office here and I could smell something and I don't like it, smells like rotten eggs or something, then I should fix that. It may not be toxic, but I should fix that. And I should get better ventilation. We should try and find out what it is. So I just think it's how we treat our people and apply the same standard that you may at home as at work would be my suggestion on that one. So, oops, how did that happen? So this is our workshop on error management, if you like, with Dr. Todd Bentley, ex-Metro Trains Melbourne. So what he's going to look at is a different approach to looking at human error and help us to understand not only human error, but some practical ways to minimise the adverse effects. So that's coming up on 28th of April, obviously subject to COVID. This same session was cancelled in April of last year because of COVID. We spoke to Todd. He only wants to deliver it face-to-face. It doesn't work quite the same online because of the nature of the exercises and interaction with this session. So if you're interested, subject to COVID safety, it's a short 2-hour session. We've got a very large conference room, so we'll have limited numbers. They'll be quite spacious for social distancing and other COVID safe controls. So hopefully COVID doesn't get worse in Melbourne and we'll be able to run that. So if you're interested, that's on our website as well as in our newsletter. You can book. So just to finish off for this month, this month's webinar, just to give you a pointer for next month. Maybe it's my sense of humour, but the feature article for our next newsletter will be Evil Swims. Now, just in case you're not familiar with the term SWIMS, Safe Work Method Statement, but you could put in JSA, you could put SOP, you could put SWP. I don't care what you call them, it's the safe work procedure. It's how I'm going to do the job. And my hint is the devil is in the detail. And what we have found is that most swims we look at are what we say are not fit for purpose. So we're hoping that you're not the devil, or you don't prepare evil swims, but we're going to show you what the devil would do if he wrote a procedure and how he would go about it. And interestingly, we think it's how a lot of procedures are currently prepared. We don't think the people are evil, but we think they're preparing it just like the devil would. So we're going to show you how to avoid that and how to do it correctly. Now, also last year, because of COVID, we cancelled our annual safety performance benchmarking survey, which we've been holding annually for a good number of years now. And a couple of our good friends have contacted me and said, hey, where's the latest benchmarking report? I actually use it. I actually find it helpful. And I explained, well, we haven't run one now for close to 2 years, because we even suffered getting people to participate in the 2019 to get the data in. So we didn't run it because of difficulties last year. A lot of workers were not at work, so it was a very different landscape. It may be similar this year, with not everyone back at work, or they won't be back at work until later in the year. So it's going to be a bit of an interesting year. However, excuse me, Steve Webber of our office, who heads this area up for us, has put a number of interesting questions into the survey, and we think they're quite unique. So it's not just a matter of, oh, your lost data, what's your LTI rate, how many medical treatment injuries, or how many days lost, or what's your workers' comp cost. All of that's nice, and we do need to know it, the lag and lost data. But to understand what parts of your system, what systems have you got, and if you've got good performance, what are those other questions or aspects of your safety program that make your program more effective? So we're looking for, is there a statistical link between the parts of your program that you have and are strong and good performance, or is the good performers got totally different things? So this is the part of what we're going to be able to show you. But this year, here's the point. Here's what we want. Everyone who reads our newsletter, everyone who attends these webinars, and all of our clients and friends, I want you to start thinking about getting the benchmarking data together. We're going to do this to end of June. So in July, we'll be asking for data, July and August. It could either be for the previous calendar year or the previous financial year, we don't care. We just want 12 months data, recent data. But we want you to talk to your friends and colleagues as well in businesses and say, we want you to participate in the benchmarking survey. The data and the results of it and the conclusions are more valid with the bigger the survey that we have. So in the past, we have had, let me see, probably approaching 100,000 employees covered by all of the participants. That has shrunk over a couple of years because a number of big clients dropped off participating in the survey, or indeed some of their businesses have fragmented, so we don't have the same data collection. But we want to grow this again this year. So if we're going to run it, I want everyone to think about, yes, I will provide the data. It's not difficult, because let me tell you, if you're in a business and you're in safety and you don't have this data, I have to question what the heck you're doing. But this is straightforward data that should be there easy. This is not something we're asking you to do a big exercise to collect. This is the same data and information you should be reporting every month to your management. So it's not difficult, but make sure you're starting to have that ready and easy to hand over to us. So just before we're coming to the end of our session, so hopefully I haven't been gone too fast. I've rattled through quite a few subjects here, but I've tried to give a bit of background to what you may have seen in our newsletter or have heard from different sources. So I'll just check with Andrea before I sign off. Andrea, is there any questions or anything else you wanted me to cover before we wrap up today's session?
Okay, so nobody's posed any questions for us on the questions panel. If anyone has any questions, you can let us know. Now. Otherwise, feel free to send us an email if you think of anything later, and we'll endeavour to either answer your question directly, or if you have something that's interest to everyone, we'll share the response in the next webinar in March.
Terrific. Thank you, Andrea, then, and thank you everyone else. Goodbye, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Bye.
Thanks. See you next time.
Bye.